appraised at $600,000. The same week a TV segment called this building haunted. A certified letter offered $275, no inspection. 2 weeks earlier, a shell company tied to the buyer filed a zoning variance that could multiply the land's value. Here are the dates and the documents. The 1923 deed lists a private social club, not a speakeasy. A 1920 survey notes the cellar was sealed to comply with Prohibition. Under a loose board in the basement, a sealed box with 1920s ledgers and a promissory note. The numbers don't match the rumor. On this block, 9 buildings sold below market in 18 months. Mine is the last holdout. A rumor erased $500,000 in equity. The variance explains who benefits. We're not chasing ghosts, we're following documents. By minute 2, the offer letter. By minute 4, the variance date. By minute 6, the basement ledgers. Decide for yourself. And tell me in the comments where you listen to our stories, your city and the time you usually watch, so I can schedule releases when you're on. The building smelled like patience. Old wood, mineral dust, and something faintly sweet. Maybe varnish from the 1920s, maybe just time itself, settling into the grain of the floorboards. I'd inherited the place from my great-aunt Rose 6 months earlier, a 4-story walk-up on the edge of Pilsen with good bones and better secrets. The basement still had a bricked-up doorway that led nowhere, or so the blueprints claimed. Rose used to say the walls remembered things we'd forgotten. I thought she meant family stories. I didn't know she meant proof. The rumor started small, the way poison always does. A neighbor mentioned it first, casually, over coffee at the corner bakery, that she'd heard my building used to be a speakeasy back when Chicago ran on bootleg gin and bribes. I smiled. I already knew. Rose had left me a shoebox of photos, flapper dresses, men in suspenders, a bar cart half hidden behind a false wall. But then the neighbor leaned in, voice dropping, and added the new part. They say it's cursed. Bad moonshine. People died. I set my cup down carefully. Who says? She shrugged. It's going around. By the end of the week, it was everywhere. The corner store owner asked if I'd had the place cleansed. A prospective tenant backed out, citing energy concerns. Someone spray-painted a crescent moon on my back door, a clumsy attempt at mysticism but effective. The building, which had been slowly filling with artists and small business inquiries, went quiet. My phone stopped ringing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was deliberate. I traced the rumor backward, the way you follow a crack in plaster to find the leak. Social media posts, all recent, all citing local historians who never left names. A blog that appeared 3 weeks prior devoted entirely to Chicago's haunted properties, with my address featured in the inaugural post. The writing was breathless, the facts just wrong enough to avoid libel. Dates slightly off, names misspelled, the curse itself too vague to disprove. But the effect was surgical. My building, which had been appraised at $600,000, was now flagged in every neighborhood forum as a liability. Then I saw the offer. It arrived via certified mail on heavy stock that cost more than my weekly groceries. Quinn Development Group. They'd purchased the property as is, no inspection, close in 30 days. The price was $275,000, less than half its value. The letter was polite, almost sympathetic. They understood the challenges of owning a property with a complicated past. They were willing to take on the burden. I read it twice. The first time my hands shook, the second time they steadied. Quinn Development had been buying up the block for 18 months, flipping old buildings into condos with rooftop bars and floor-to-ceiling glass. I declined their first offer, full price, contingent on inspection, because I'd planned to keep the building, honor Rose's memory, create something that wasn't just profit margin. That was 4 months ago, before the curse, before the spray paint, before the silence. I walked down to the basement that night, past the narrow staircase that still had Rose's handprints in the dust on the railing, past the storage cage that held her furniture and my assumptions. The bricked-up doorway was in the northwest corner, behind a shelf of canning jars she'd never thrown away. I moved the jars. The bricks were old, yes, but the mortar was newer, patched, maybe in the 70s, maybe later. I ran my fingers along the seam. The building had been holding its breath. Now I needed to know why. I pressed my palm flat against the brick. It was cool, solid, waiting. Outside, the developer's lie was spreading, turning my inheritance into a ghost story, turning my future into their profit. But in here in the dark, the walls remembered. And I was finally ready to listen. The curse made the evening news on a Tuesday. I was folding laundry when my phone lit up with texts. 3 former tenants, 2 college friends, my dentist. They'd all seen it. Channel 7's Neighborhood Watch segment, 4 minutes and 32 seconds of breathless speculation about Chicago's most haunted block, complete with B-roll of my building shot in unflattering twilight, and an interview with a self-proclaimed urban folklore expert I'd never heard of. He wore a bow tie and spoke with the certainty of someone who'd never paid property tax. "The moonshine curse is well documented," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Traces of methanol poisoning, unexplained deaths, residual energy that lingers in the very foundation." I watched it twice. The first time my chest tightened, the second time I took notes. They never said my name. They didn't have to. The address was visible in the corner of every shot, and the online forums did the rest. By Wednesday morning, Reddit had a thread with 200 comments. Next door was worse. Neighbors I'd never met debating whether I had a moral obligation to disclose the curse to future tenants, as if folklore required the same paperwork as lead paint. Someone posted a photo of the spray-painted moon on my back door with the caption, "Even the spirits are trying to warn her." But it was the real estate blog that made my hands go cold. Pilsen property plagued by past had been updated with a timeline, dates, incidents, names. A fire in 1927 that killed 2 people, a string of business failures in the 50s, a tenant in the 80s who'd left under mysterious circumstances. The blog cited archived newspaper reports and municipal records, yet provided no links, no sources, nothing I could verify or refute. The writing had the veneer of research but the structure of a hit piece, and at the bottom, in italics, "Current owner declined to comment." I'd never been contacted for comment. I started in the basement because that's where Rose had kept everything she couldn't bear to throw away but didn't want to see. Boxes labeled in her careful cursive. Tax returns 1968-1982, recipes and remedies. Building, original papers. I pulled down the last one. The cardboard was soft with age, the corners reinforced with masking tape that had gone brittle. Inside were deeds, surveys, insurance documents, and a stack of letters bound with kitchen twine. The first deed was dated 1923. My great-great-grandfather, Anton Kovac, had purchased the property for $8,000, a fortune then, but he'd saved for years, worked the stockyards, lived in a single room with his wife and 3 children until he could afford something permanent. The deed listed the property as commercial space with residential upper floors, previously operated as a private social club. Not a speakeasy. A club. Legal, licensed, respectable. I unfolded the survey. The basement had always been marked, but there was a notation in the margin, handwritten in fatting ink. "Secondary storage wine cellar, sealed 1920 per federal order. Prohibition." They'd sealed it themselves preemptively to avoid trouble. That explained the bricktop doorway. Not a cover-up. Compliance. The letters were harder to read. Anton's English had been functional but spare, and his son's, my great-grandfather's, was formal, cautious, the writing of someone who'd learned that every word on paper could be used against you. But one letter, dated 1928, was different. It was addressed to the city's licensing and inspection bureau, and it was angry. "Sirs," it began, "I write to protest the false claims made against my property by rival business interests. The so-called deaths attributed to this establishment occurred elsewhere and involved parties with no connection to our club. We operated lawfully, we closed lawfully, and we will not be slandered by men who wish to profit from our reputation." I read it 3 times. Rival business interests, men who wish to profit. The fire in 1927, the one the blog cited as evidence of the curse, had happened 2 blocks away at a different address. I found the original Tribune clipping in another box, the date and location clear. The business failures in the 50s were a butcher shop and a dry cleaner, neither of which had ever operated in my building. And the tenant in the 80s, I called the property management company Rose had used. They still had records. He'd left because he'd gotten a job in Denver. No mystery, no curse, just a man who moved. Every claim was a distortion, a fact stretched until it snapped and became fiction. I went back online. The urban folklore expert had a website. His credentials included a bachelor's degree in communications and a podcast with 6 episodes, the last uploaded in 2019. He'd been paid for the interview. Channel 7's public disclosures listed him as a consultant, compensated at a standard rate. Someone had fed him the story or paid him to tell it. Either way, he wasn't a historian. He was a prop. I pulled up the property records for the surrounding block. Quinn Development had acquired 9 buildings in the past 18 months, all within a 3-block radius of mine. The sales prices were lower than market value, some significantly so. One had sold for 40% below appraisal after a pipe burst flooded the ground floor. Another went for half price following a dispute with the city over a zoning violation that was later dismissed. They were buying distressed assets or creating the distress themselves. My building was the last holdout, the only property on the block they didn't control. And if they controlled the block, they controlled the development rights, the air rights, the zoning appeals, the tax incentives the city handed out for revitalizing old neighborhoods. My 4 stories were standing between them and a 10-story glass tower with condos starting at $500,000. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by Rose's boxes, and felt the contrast settle into my bones. They'd built a ghost story to bury the truth, but the truth had a deed, a date, and a name, and unlike their curse, it could be proven. The walls didn't just remember, they had receipts. The decision arrived without drama, the way most real turning points do. I made it sitting at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning, with Rose's letters spread out beside my laptop and a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Outside, the city was still dark, still quiet, the kind of silence that comes just before the world wakes up and starts making noise again. I'd spent the night reading, cross-referencing, tracing the pattern of lies back to their source. Now I knew what they'd done. The question was what I would do. I could sell. Take the low offer, walk away, let Quinn Development have their tower and their profit. It would be easier, quieter. No one would blame me for choosing peace over principle, especially when principle came with legal bills and public scrutiny and the exhausting labor of proving what should have been obvious. That's what they were counting on, that I'd do the math and decide my dignity wasn't worth the cost. But I'd also done different math. If I sold at their price, I'd lose $325,000 in equity, plus the future income from tenants, plus the legacy Rose had trusted me to protect. And Quinn would gain not just my building, but the entire block, the air rights, the zoning leverage, the tax abatements the city was offering for historical preservation, a term they'd use right up until the wrecking ball arrived. They'd turn my family's century of work into their quarterly earnings report. They'd erase Anton's name from the deed and replace it with luxury and lies. I couldn't stop them from wanting it, but I could stop them from taking it. I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Timeline and Tasks. Not a battle plan, not a revenge fantasy, just a clear, methodical list of what needed to happen and in what order. I'd spent years as a project manager for a healthcare nonprofit, coordinating grants and audits and compliance reviews. I knew how to build a case. I knew how to work in silence while others made noise. First, I needed documentation, not just Rose's letters and deeds, but official records that would hold up under scrutiny. I made a note to visit the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office, pull every transaction tied to my property and the surrounding parcels, map out Quinn's acquisition pattern with dates and prices. Public records were public for a reason. If they'd been buying distressed assets, I needed to know whether the distress was organic or engineered. Second, I needed expert validation. The curse narrative relied on historical distortion, which meant I needed a real historian, someone with credentials, publications, institutional affiliation, someone whose word would carry weight against a podcaster in a bow tie. I searched Chicago historical societies, found 3 with expertise in immigrant communities and Prohibition-era architecture, drafted an email requesting a consultation. Polite, professional, no mention of curses or developers, just a property owner seeking accurate information about her building's past. Third, I needed legal counsel, but not yet. Lawyers were expensive, and I didn't have a case to bring, only a suspicion and a pattern. I'd wait until I had evidence, real and unambiguous, before I spent money I might not recover. In the meantime, I bookmarked the Illinois Attorney General's page on consumer fraud and the Chicago Department of Business Affairs complaint portal. I wanted to know my options before I needed them. Fourth and most important, I needed to stay quiet. Every instinct wanted me to post my findings online, to counter their narrative with mine, to defend myself in the same forums where they'd attacked me. But that would tip my hand. They'd know I was digging and they'd adjust. They'd scrub records, coach witnesses, shift tactics. The louder I got, the harder this would become. Silence was my leverage. Let them think the curse was working. Let them think I was scared, overwhelmed, ready to cave. Let them get comfortable. I saved the document and closed my laptop. The coffee was cold, but I drank it anyway. Outside, the sky was starting to pale, that fragile pre-dawn blue that makes the city look almost gentle. In a few hours, my phone would start buzzing again. More texts, more concerned questions, more people who'd seen the news and wanted to know if I was okay. I'd tell them I was fine. I'd tell them I was thinking it over. I'd tell them nothing that mattered. Because the fight wasn't going to happen in public forums or news segments or breathless blog posts. It was going to happen in records offices and historical archives and careful, documented conversations with people who dealt in facts, not folklore. They'd built their strategy on noise and pressure and the assumption that I'd break under the weight of both. They were wrong about the weight I could carry, and they were about to learn the difference between silence and surrender. The air in the archives was thick with the weight of history, a stark contrast to the shallow narratives I had encountered elsewhere. I immersed myself in the city's historical records, poring over the yellowed pages of newspaper microfilms that whispered the secrets of the Speakeasy, long obscured by myths of a curse. Each scan of original building permits revealed not just signatures, but the lifeblood of a community, connecting me to the people who had once thrived in this space. Yet the waiting period stretched longer than I'd anticipated. I submitted requests for non-digitized documents, each one a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. Hours turned into days, my patience tested as I found myself at the counter of the Historical Society, the scent of musty paper surrounding me like an embrace. Finally, I held the forgotten property easements, their faded ink a testament to the past. These artifacts contradicted the antagonist's narrative, illuminating a vibrant truth about resilience instead of ruin. With each document, the fabrications began to unravel. I meticulously documented my findings, historical business licenses that showcased the Speakeasy's legitimate operations, contrasting sharply with the antagonist's claims of decay. This wasn't just a quest for vindication. It was about reclaiming a legacy. As the pieces fell into place, the silence of my research transformed into a powerful voice, one that would soon demand to be heard. In that moment, I realized the truth was my greatest ally. The narrative I was constructing wasn't merely a defense, it was a declaration. If they wanted to distort my past into a curse, I would use the very history they sought to erase to reclaim my future. As I sifted through the layers of my research, a chilling clarity emerged, revealing the antagonist's true intentions. The curse they perpetuated was not merely folklore. It was a calculated smokescreen designed to obscure their scheme to acquire my strategically located property for a much larger development. The contrast between the public narrative and the hidden agenda became stark, like daylight piercing through thick fog. In the midst of this unraveling, I stumbled upon an obscure zoning variance proposal filed by one of the antagonist shell companies. The document, buried in a stack of bureaucratic filings, held the potential to flip the narrative entirely. If granted, this variance would enhance the value of my land exponentially, far exceeding their current devalued offer. The proposal's stipulations were intricate, detailing plans for high-rise condominiums and commercial spaces that would transform the neighborhood. Yet the real shock lay in the timeline. I could only imagine the quiet meetings where they had plotted this out, their confidence buoyed by the facade of the curse. I noted the submission date, just weeks before their latest offer arrived in my inbox, a clear indication that they were attempting to manipulate the situation to their advantage. In that moment, I realized how oblivious they were to the power of the truth I was uncovering. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a surge of determination. The blueprint they had drawn up for their future was now my weapon. I wasn't just defending my property. I was positioning myself to reclaim the narrative, to turn their deception into my strategic comeback. The pieces were finally falling into place, and I was ready to make my move. With each passing day, the weight of the antagonist's narrative felt heavier, yet I was armed with a quiet resolve. I began to subtly test their story, planting small, verifiable counterinformation in local historical groups and online forums. The thrill of disruption coursed through me as I crafted posts that challenged the accepted myths, slyly inserting facts about the Speakeasy's vibrant history and its legitimate connections. The contrast between their polished facade and my whispered truths was exhilarating. Navigating these online spaces was not without its frictions. I encountered gatekeeping from historical society volunteers, their dismissive tones a reminder of the barriers I was up against. Some inquiries were met with skepticism, my name unfamiliar in a community steeped in long-held beliefs. But each response, whether hostile or curious, offered insights into the cracks in their carefully constructed narrative. I noted the patterns in their defensiveness, the way they rallied to protect their story, and I used that knowledge to refine my approach. Instead of fading into the background, I found my voice resonating with those who sought authenticity. The whispers I seeded transformed into ripples of curiosity, drawing in others who were eager for a deeper understanding of our shared history. I could almost taste the shift in the air, the tension between my emerging truths and their steadfast control. If they wanted to play a game of shadows, I would be the one casting light. As I continued this delicate dance, I realized that the power of information was on my side. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was an architect of a narrative that could dismantle their carefully curated facade. The whispers of truth would soon become a chorus, one that would demand to be heard, and I was ready to lead the way. It was a stroke of luck, or perhaps fate, that led me to the hidden compartment tucked away in the corner of my building's basement. The air was thick with dust, and the light flickered as I pried open a loose floorboard, revealing a sealed box. My heart raced as I lifted the lid, a rush of anticipation mingling with the musty scent of aged paper. Inside lay original 1920s accounting ledgers, their pages yellowed but intact, alongside a forgotten promissory note that whispered secrets of the past. This discovery was more than mere documentation. It was the missing piece of a puzzle that had haunted me since the beginning. The ledgers detailed transactions that painted a picture of the Speakeasy's bustling life and the vibrant community that had once thrived within these walls. Yet, the promissory note was the real gem, a legally binding document that confirmed the financial ties of the previous owner, connections that the antagonist had deliberately overlooked in their quest for my property. They weren't after a cursed piece of real estate. They were after a treasure buried beneath layers of history and neglect. As I studied the notes, the truth crystallized. The antagonist's motive was not just greed, but a calculated move to seize something far more valuable than they let on. They had intended to exploit the property's perceived devaluation while ignoring its hidden worth. This stark contrast between their public narrative and the reality I was uncovering filled me with a sense of power. I was no longer merely defending my land. I was reclaiming its legacy. With this knowledge in hand, I felt an exhilarating shift in momentum. The vault of secrets I had unearthed was my strategic advantage, a key to dismantling their carefully crafted storyline. If they believed silence would bury the truth, they were about to learn that I was the one holding the keys to a much richer narrative. Laying the traps. Armed with irrefutable evidence, I felt a surge of clarity as I began to prepare my legal and public counterattack. Working closely with a skilled real estate attorney, I drafted cease and desist letters that would put the antagonist on notice. Each word was carefully chosen, a quiet yet powerful affirmation of my rights. The contrast between their continued bluster and my meticulous preparation was striking. They were still basking in the illusion of control, while I was laying the groundwork for a decisive comeback. This phase required precision, not just in legal terms but in public perception. I crafted a detailed debunking of the moonshine curse narrative, aimed at exposing the truth behind the facade. My attorney and I meticulously outlined the historical significance of my property, juxtaposing it against the flimsy claims made by the antagonist. As I pored over the documents, the weight of history fueled my resolve. I was no longer just a victim of circumstance but an architect of my own narrative. Yet, while they thrived on chaos, I reveled in the quiet of strategic execution. I knew that the most powerful moves often went unnoticed until the moment was right. If they thought their bluster would drown out my truth, they were about to learn a hard lesson. This was about more than just reclaiming my property. It was about redefining my legacy. As I finalized the letters, a thought lingered. If you're building your own comeback story, remember that precise execution beats loud pronouncements every time. I couldn't help but wonder, what's one step you can take today to assert your own truth? The answer was clear. Every action I took brought me closer to seizing control of my narrative. The first chink. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my desk, I felt a quiet thrill of anticipation. The legal team had finalized a preliminary letter to the antagonist, meticulously citing specific historical documents and legal precedents that supported my position. Each line was crafted with precision, designed to assert my rights without revealing the full extent of my evidence. This quiet maneuver marked the beginning of a calculated shift in the power dynamic. The contrast between their initial dismissive attitude and the sudden hesitation that followed was palpable. Within days, I noticed a distinct change. Their confident facade began to crack. Social media posts that once boasted of their triumphs turned cautious, filled with vague reassurances rather than bold proclamations. Their media campaign, which had seemed untouchable, showed signs of faltering. The once boisterous tone had shifted, replaced by an undercurrent of uncertainty. I reveled in this shift, watching as the antagonist's bravado gave way to a defensive posture. They had relied on intimidation and misinformation, but now they were forced to reconsider. This was no longer just a battle for property. It was a war of narratives, and I was steadily reclaiming mine. The whispers of truth I had seeded were taking root, and the realization that they were not invulnerable sent a rush of empowerment through me. With their confidence shaken, I prepared for the next phase of my strategy. If they thought they could maintain control through bluster alone, they were about to discover that the quiet strength of truth was far more formidable. The ripple effect. As the days passed, I could feel the undercurrents shifting. The antagonist, sensing a threat but unsure of its source, escalated their public smear campaign. Their attacks, once confident and loud, now felt desperate, almost frantic. The once polished facade began to crack, revealing the chaos beneath. I watched as they unleashed a barrage of accusations, each more outrageous than the last, aimed at tarnishing my reputation and undermining my claims. A calculated move, their legal counsel filed a vague nuisance lawsuit against me, a common tactic to drain resources and instill fear. The documents arrived via certified mail, each page a reminder of their attempts to intimidate. I noted the timestamps, the way they strategically timed the filing to coincide with their latest social media blitz, hoping to create a narrative of guilt by association. Yet, each word of their complaint was laden with uncertainty, a reflection of their own insecurity. I remained silent publicly, allowing their chaotic noise to stand in stark contrast to my controlled, strategic response. Instead of engaging in their drama, I focused on fortifying my position, gathering more evidence and refining my approach. The contrast between their frantic attempts to regain control and my calm resolve was almost palpable. Each time they lashed out, I felt more empowered, like a quiet blade cutting through the noise. While they floundered in desperation, I was methodically laying the groundwork for my comeback. The ripple effect of their actions would soon reveal the strength of my resolve. I wouldn't be a pawn in their game. I was building something far more substantial, and the waves of their miscalculation would only serve to propel me forward. The evening air was thick with anticipation as I contemplated my next move. I decided to deploy a pattern interrupt, a strategic shift in my approach that would catch the antagonist off guard. I hired a private investigator, not to unearth dirt on them, but to meticulously document their public statements and previous development projects. Each detail mattered. The investigator's task was to gather a comprehensive record that would reveal the true nature of their dealings. What emerged from the investigator's findings was a striking pattern. As I pored over the meticulously compiled reports, I noted instances of similar deceptive tactics employed in other acquisitions. The way they spun narratives, framing their projects as community enhancements while systematically undermining local opposition, painted a picture of calculated opportunism rather than mere accidental misdirection. It was a chilling realization. They had built their empire on a foundation of manipulation. Yet, while they operated in the shadows, I was bringing their tactics into the light. The contrast between their hidden strategies and my intention to expose them felt like a quiet revolution. I documented every finding, each piece of evidence adding weight to my case, and I began to envision how I would use this information strategically. This wasn't just about defending my property. It was about revealing the truth behind their facade. If they thought they could continue their game without accountability, they were mistaken. The unseen hands of my investigator would soon become a powerful ally, turning their deceptive maneuvers into the very rope that could bind them. The reckoning. The moment had arrived. The full legal and public offensive was about to launch, and my heart raced with a blend of anticipation and resolve. I stood at the precipice of reclaiming my narrative, ready to file the lawsuit for slander and deceptive practices. The paperwork was meticulously prepared, each page a testament to the diligence I had invested in this fight. My attorney and I had made sure every detail was in place, ready to expose the antagonist's fabrications for what they truly were. Simultaneously, we prepared a well-researched press release, one that would be widely distributed to local media outlets and community forums. This was not just a statement. It was a meticulously crafted document that systematically debunked the curse narrative with concrete historical evidence. I pored over each line, ensuring it conveyed the truth without sensationalism, relying instead on the weight of facts. The contrast between my thorough preparation and their flimsy fabrications was stark, a battle between reality and illusion. As the press release hit the inboxes of journalists and community leaders, I felt a surge of empowerment. I could almost hear the echo of my truth resonating in the silence of their denial. While they had thrived on chaos and misinformation, I was now armed with irrefutable evidence that painted a different picture, one of resilience, history, and community. The antagonist was about to confront the undeniable reality of my meticulous preparation, a reckoning they had never anticipated. As I pressed send on the press release, I understood that this was more than just a legal battle. It was a defining moment. The tides were shifting, and I was ready to reclaim my narrative, one fact at a time. As the days unfolded, a palpable shift occurred in the air around me. Local media outlets and historical societies began to pick up my story, their interest ignited by the press release that had systematically debunked the antagonist's lies. The narrative transformed dramatically as the truth found its voice and reverberated through the community. It was exhilarating to watch. What had once been whispers in the dark now echoed loudly, filling the public sphere with facts and testimonies that painted a stark contrast to the antagonist's fabrications. With each article published and each community forum discussion ignited, the antagonist's public image began to erode. Their once unassailable confidence turned shaky, the cracks widening as the truth emerged. This wasn't merely a private legal dispute anymore. It had escalated into a public moral and ethical debate, a spectacle that demanded attention. While I stood firm in my resolve, they floundered under the weight of their deception, forced to confront the repercussions of their actions. The shift in venue felt almost surreal. I was no longer just defending my rights. I was advocating for a deeper truth, one that challenged the very foundations of their narrative. The contrast between their chaotic attempts to regain control and my poised, proactive stance was striking. They scrambled to salvage their reputation while I calmly articulated the history and significance of my property, an embodiment of resilience and community spirit. This pattern interrupt had significant reputational consequences for them, leaving them vulnerable in a way they had never anticipated. As I watched their influence wane, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The echoes of my truth were becoming a powerful force, reverberating beyond my immediate fight and reshaping the conversation in the community. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that the tide had irrevocably turned. In the sterile atmosphere of the neutral legal setting, the tension was palpable. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. Before me lay irrefutable evidence, the hidden ledgers and the promissory note, each piece a cornerstone of my case. As I laid them out on the polished table, the contrast between the organized facts and the chaotic narrative of the antagonist became stark. The antagonist, seated across from me, attempted to regain control with bluster. Their voice rose, filled with bravado, yet I remained calm, unwavering. Each denial they threw at me was met with quiet, undeniable facts. I pointed to the ledgers, their ink still fresh with the history of transactions that painted a different story, a story of legitimacy and community, not the cursed property they had portrayed. Their past arrogance, once a shield, now felt like a burden, weighing them down as they struggled to reconcile their fabricated claims with the reality I presented. As I watched their defensiveness creep in, a sense of empowerment surged within me. This was not just about the evidence. It was about reclaiming my narrative, transforming my silence into strength. I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes, a clear indication that the truth was cutting through their bravado. The tables had turned, and the boundary between deception and reality was narrowing. This unveiling served as the final act before formal judgment, the moment where all pretense would be stripped away. I knew that the truth would prevail, and as I calmly articulated my case, I felt the momentum shift decisively in my favor. The time for noise had passed. Now, it was time for the quiet power of facts to speak for themselves. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I sensed a shift in the air, a tension that hinted at the antagonist's growing desperation. Cornered and with their back against the wall, they made one last desperate maneuver, a calculated attempt to salvage their crumbling facade. I received a last-minute settlement offer, hastily drafted and laced with vague promises. The terms were designed to save face and minimize their legal exposure, but they felt flimsy, lacking the substance necessary to sway me. Their final move revealed the extent of their desperation, a stark contrast to the confident aggression they had displayed just weeks prior. I could almost envision their frantic strategy sessions, where they must have realized how precarious their position had become. The arrogance that had once fueled their attacks was now replaced by a palpable fear, and it was almost poetic to witness. But I stood firm, having anticipated their every move. Each step of this journey had been meticulously planned, and I had prepared for this moment. I recalled the countless hours spent gathering evidence, the conversations with my attorney, and the careful documentation of my case. Their offer, while tempting to many, felt like a mere distraction, an attempt to divert attention from the truth that I was ready to unveil. I understood that this was not just about winning, it was about justice and reclaiming my narrative. As I sat across from them, I felt a quiet strength wash over me. The power dynamics had shifted. Their desperation was evident, but my resolve was unyielding. I would not be swayed by their last-ditch efforts. Instead, I would let the truth guide me forward. The final gambit had been played, and I was ready to call their bluff. The moment hung in the air like the calm before a storm, an electric tension that was almost palpable. After weeks of legal wrangling, the day had arrived. The verdict was about to be announced. I sat in the courtroom, my heart steady but my mind racing, knowing that this decision would determine not just the fate of my property, but the culmination of my journey. The light streaming through the tall windows felt almost surreal, illuminating the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. When the judge finally spoke, his voice resonated with authority, each word slicing through the tension. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," he declared, affirming the property's formal clearing of any curse allegations. Those words echoed in my mind, a sweet balm for the countless moments of doubt and struggle I had endured. The true historical value of my property was acknowledged, a long overdue recognition of its significance and legacy. The contrast between my position and that of the antagonist was striking. While I had stood firm in my truth, they had crumbled under the weight of their own deception. I could see the disbelief wash over their faces, their earlier bravado evaporating like mist in the sunlight. This was not merely a legal victory, it was a personal triumph, a testament to patience, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. As the courtroom began to clear, a sense of peace settled over me. Justice had prevailed, and I felt a profound satisfaction in knowing that I had reclaimed my narrative. The weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by a future filled with possibility. The journey was far from over, but I was ready to embrace it, confident in my newfound strength and the knowledge that I had turned the tide. As I stood at the threshold of my property, anticipation coursed through me. This wasn't just a building, it was a testament to resilience, a legacy woven with the stories of those who had come before me. I had decided to host an event that would publicly reestablish its true history, a celebration of the vibrant community that had thrived here long before the whispers of a fabricated curse took hold. The air buzzed with potential, each moment a chance to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The invitation had been carefully crafted, sent to local historians, community leaders, and neighbors who cherished this place as much as I did. The contrast between their excitement and the antagonist's desperate attempts to distort our history was striking. On the day of the event, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the building's facade, its historical significance shining through the layers of doubt that had been cast over it. As guests arrived, I walked them through the restored spaces, sharing stories not just of the property, but of the real people who had built it, their dreams, their struggles, and their triumphs. I showcased photographs from the archives, once hidden away, now framed prominently for all to see. The walls echoed with laughter and conversation, a stark reminder of the life that had always existed here. Each story I shared helped to erase the stain of the curse, replacing it with a rich tapestry of truth. This act of reclaiming ownership and narrative felt powerful, a quiet revolution unfolding before my eyes. I could feel the shift. Truth was emerging from the hidden spaces where it had been buried. As I looked around at the faces illuminated with appreciation, I knew that this was more than an event. It was a reaffirmation of identity, a stand against the noise of falsehoods. The legacy of my property was no longer defined by whispers of a curse, but instead celebrated for all it truly represented. As I surveyed the property, a sense of calm washed over me. The legal battle was finally behind me, and I could now envision the future without the weight of past conflicts clouding my thoughts. This space, once marred by whispers of a curse, now hummed with new, positive potential. I took a deep breath, feeling the air shift around me, infused with the promise of what was to come. I began to outline my plans, each idea more exhilarating than the last. Transforming this place into a historical landmark was not just a dream. It was a commitment to honor the rich tapestry of stories that had unfolded within these walls. I envisioned guided tours that would share the true history of the Speakeasy, educational programs that would engage local schools, and community events that would celebrate its vibrant past. This property was more than just a building. It was a living testament to resilience and community spirit. Yet I also saw room for growth. A community-focused venture could breathe new life into the area, fostering connections among neighbors and honoring the legacy of those who had come before. Perhaps a cafe that featured locally sourced ingredients, or art installations that celebrated the history of the neighborhood. Each idea was a thread weaving together the past and the future, creating a fabric rich in purpose and connection. With every detail I sketched out, the quiet space transformed before my eyes, no longer a relic of conflict but a beacon of hope. I knew the journey ahead would require effort and dedication, but I felt invigorated by the possibilities. This was not just about reclaiming a property. It was about building a new foundation, one that would resonate with the community for generations to come. The echoes of the past would guide me, but the future was mine to shape. As I stood in the restored building, a sense of peace enveloped me. The air was filled with the scent of fresh paint and polished wood, a testament to the transformation it had undergone. This place, once overshadowed by the weight of fabricated curses, now shone with the light of its true history. I took a moment to absorb the stillness around me, the quiet hum of life returning to its walls. I was no longer just an owner. I had become the keeper of whispers, a guardian of the stories that had shaped this space. In this role, I felt a profound responsibility to ensure that the truth would be told, that the narratives of those who built and cherished this place would not be lost to time. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but every obstacle had only deepened my commitment to honoring the past. I envisioned the future filled with community gatherings, educational programs, and tours that would bring the history to life for generations to come. The contrast of my new identity struck me. Once perceived as a mere caretaker, I had transformed into a custodian of legacy. They sought to bury my past. Instead, they unearthed my future. This mic drop line echoed in my mind, a powerful reminder of the resilience I had cultivated through adversity. As I looked around, I recognized that my story was no longer defined by the shadows of deceit, but by the light of truth and community. With a smile, I embraced my role, ready to share the whispers of history with anyone willing to listen. The future was bright, and I was determined to ensure that the voices of the past would never fade into silence again. As the sun set, casting a warm glow through the windows, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment wash over me. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where truth would thrive and the whispers of the past would guide us forward.